For decades, Iran has been preparing for something like this. Always with eyes turned toward Israel and the US, it has been building air defenses and creating a military that was supposed to counter what was coming. Iran failed. The US did something so massive to Iran that it will go down in history. The 10,000th target has just been hit, and Iran has practically nothing left to stand. On March 25th, US Central Command, or CENTCOM Commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, delivered his newest breakdown of everything the US has achieved during Operation Epic Fury so far. The headline was also one of the first things out of Cooper's mouth as he proclaimed, "We're in the 4th week of the campaign and remain on plan, or ahead of plan, in achieving very clear military objectives for eliminating Iran's ability to project power in meaningful ways outside its borders," Cooper began. He then delivered the number, stating, "US forces have struck more than 10,000 military targets. In fact, we hit the 10,000th Iranian target just hours ago." Now, Cooper went on to explain that 10,000 is America's number. When you add Israel and its airstrikes into the mix, several thousand more targets have been hit. Many thousands more, in fact. On March 13th, the Wall Street Journal reported that US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth had claimed that the US and Israel had combined to strike 15,000 targets, which was over 1,000 targets per day at the time of the statement. The sheer scale and ferocity of Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion have wound down somewhat since that announcement, likely due to Iran having fewer military targets to strike. But given that 15,000 was the joint number before Cooper made his statements, it's not inconceivable to believe that the US and Israel have combined to hit somewhere close to 20,000 targets since February 28th. But even taken alone, 10,000 targets struck by the US is massive news. And to clarify, these are 10,000 targets, not 10,000 munitions fired. Those targets will be varied from the massive, such as Iran's underground military and nuclear bunkers, to comparatively small targets, such as drones. Each is an individual weapon or military node that has gone down, with the largest targets likely to have been struck with multiple munitions, perhaps even repeatedly over days to take them out of commission. And what we're seeing here is a level of aerial dominance that hasn't been achieved in any other modern war. America's layered campaign, which began with strikes conducted by stealthy airframes such as the B-2 Spirit and F-35, before evolving to incorporate airframes as old as the B-52 and A-10, has shown us that the US can operate with impunity in Iran's skies. Now, that may not mean that Operation Epic Fury is coming to a close. What comes next could change everything all over again and will catch everyone off guard if the US follows up with its threats. But for now, it's enough to know that so much of Iran's military infrastructure has been obliterated as the US plots a course for its next move. And according to several in the US, Iran is now desperate to achieve some sort of end to Operation Epic Fury. US President Donald Trump claims that Iran is begging to reach a deal, and the US has responded by delivering a 15-point plan that could make that deal happen. Iran has responded to these claims, stating that the US and Iran aren't talking, and the US is negotiating with itself. Now, the truth may lie somewhere in the middle, as it seems unlikely that Iran isn't open to any sort of talks, but it is perhaps not as desperate as Trump claims it to be. Now, Cooper has also said in his piece that the combination of US and Israeli air power proves that the two countries are stronger together. He also outlines the extent of the damage done to Iran's military infrastructure, stating, "Our precision strikes have overwhelmed Iranian air defenses, and our combat flights over Iran are having tangible effects." Now, let's get into those tangible effects with a roll call of what the US has achieved so far in Operation Epic Fury. 10,000 strikes completed is an impressive enough number on its own, but it doesn't mean much without the context of what those strikes have achieved. And with that context, the reaction goes from, "Wow, that's a lot of strikes," to "How on earth is Iran's regime still standing after all of this?" Well, we'll start with Iran's missiles. Now, Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion have had a clear focus on Iran's missile launch sites, which are key to Iran's main approach of threatening its Gulf neighbors with ballistic missile strikes for as long as the US continues its attack. We have some numbers covering how many of these launches have gone down. The Israel Defense Force, or IDF, claimed on March 15th that about 70% of Iran's missile launches have been destroyed so far, which puts a massive dent not only in Iran's ballistic missile strategy, but also in its ability to launch cruise and anti-ship missiles and US Navy warships and merchant vessels. Now, the Wall Street Journal, in its own report on Israel's claim, provides a more concrete number, as it says that Israel claims that Iran has lost 330 of its 470 mobile missile launch platforms. Now, that works out to about 70%, as the IDF claims. And while questions can be asked, such as how Israel and the US know precisely how many of these mobile missile launchers there are when Iran tries to keep them underground, there's still no denying that the figure is impressive. And satellite photographs published by the Washington Post highlight this. The first 4 weeks of Operation Epic Fury have seen the US and Israel utterly destroy 29 of Iran's ballistic missile launch sites, each of which would have been home to dozens of launchers. And above-ground facilities have been taken out of commission, underground facilities have been targeted with bunker-busting bombs, and it has all been done to degrade one of the most significant threats that Iran poses to the US, Israel, and their Gulf allies. We've seen the impact of this portion of the 10,000 strikes emerge very quickly. Cooper says as much himself as he points out that Iran's missile and drone launchers are down by more than 90% since the beginning of the war, which is a sign that whatever missile saturation strategy that Iran had prepared hasn't gone to plan. Of course, this doesn't mean that Iranian missiles aren't being fired. 70% of launchers downed still leaves 30% that can fire, and that amounts to about 140 mobile launchers that the US still needs to find and destroy before Iran's missiles become a non-factor. There are also the missiles themselves. While missiles become useless without launchers, which is what has led the US down the strategic route it is now taking, you could argue that the US and Israel haven't quite done enough about Iran's missiles, even after 10,000 plus strikes. According to The Guardian, US intelligence suggests that about a third of Iran's missile stockpiles are confirmed to have been destroyed, and another third of the stockpile seems likely to have been damaged, buried, or otherwise made unusable due to America's attacks on Iran's underground tunnels and bunkers. There have also been 1,400 confirmed missile launches by Iran since the beginning of Operation Epic Fury, and though most of these would have occurred at the beginning of the war, this tells us that Iran is still a missile threat, though one that has been severely downgraded compared to what it was before. But this is where things start to shift on the Iranian missile front. It's not just launchers and stockpiles that have been taken out of commission in the 10,000 strikes. The US has also taken aim at Iran's missile and naval production facilities, as Cooper explains. Iran has large-scale manufacturing capacities to not only build naval vessels, missiles, and attack drones, but also to advance and proliferate these technologies to regional and global bad actors, Cooper explains. He adds, "Today we've damaged over 2/3 of Iran's missile, drone, and naval production facilities and shipyards," before he delivers the chilling warning that the US isn't done with all of this yet. The elimination of Iran's wider military manufacturing apparatus is also on the agenda, Cooper proclaims. Now, this is bad news for Iran, because it means that what's left of its ballistic missile strategy is now on a time limit. As more launchers and production facilities go down, every Iranian missile launch that follows is made using a stockpile that can't be replenished. And this isn't just about taking out what Iran has. The US is focusing on what Iran might try to build, which means it's crippling the regime's missile-focused doctrine for the long term. Now, we mentioned that the 10,000 strikes against Iran have included attacks on Iran's shipbuilding and naval production facilities. There's a lot more to cover on the naval front. But before we dive deeper into that, this is a quick reminder that you're watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this comes from, so hit subscribe if you're getting value from the insight that our channel offers. Beyond naval production facilities, the US has also focused on taking out as much of Iran's existing seafaring capacity as it possibly can. We see a similar strategy as the one taken with Iran's missiles, which is to destroy what already exists and then follow up by taking out the facilities that could build more. Now, on the already exists, or should we say used to exist front, the Times of Israel reports that the US has sunk 92% of the Iranian Navy's large vessels. Now, this percentage likely accounts for frigates, submarines, and Iran's makeshift aircraft carriers, and perhaps doesn't cover the fast attack boats Iran has been using to wreak havoc in the Strait of Hormuz. Still, 92% of Iran's large vessels tells us that the regime's naval might, at least on the pure power projection front, has been shattered. Pentagon figures put the total number at 130 vessels down by March 26th, though it's unclear how many of these are the large ships already mentioned and how many account for fast boats and other Iranian vessels, such as its Ghadir-class midget submarines. We do know that the 130 figure includes 40 mine layers and 11 submarines, and that Iran has been using its fast boats that lay mines in the Strait of Hormuz. America's approach right now seems to be that anything that sails for Iran is a fair target. As with the missiles, it's not accurate to say that Iran's navy no longer presents a threat. With missiles, Iran has fallen back to a strategy where it conducts small and precise launches, which at least allows it to maintain some sort of threat. When it comes to the naval part of the battle, Iran was never truly going to be able to contend with the aircraft carriers and associated warships that the US brought to the Persian Gulf region. Don't get us wrong, the regime absolutely did not want to lose so many of its warships and submarines. Still, the goal for Iran was always to leverage an asymmetric naval blockade strategy in the Strait of Hormuz, and that's a problem with which the US still has to contend. Now, Radio Free Europe, or Radio Liberty, pointed that out in a March 12 piece, where it noted that Iran's conventional navy was practically gone. But the threat to the Strait of Hormuz wasn't. Not a lot has changed at the end of March. Iran's fast boats and midget submarines are still attacking merchant ships in that strait, as are its drones and anti-ship missiles. It's not about volume here. Iran doesn't need to attack every ship that attempts to move through a waterway that is responsible for the flow of 20% of the world's oil. Attacks every so often are enough to make journeys so risky that insurers won't pay out and ship captains won't sail. The first 10,000 strikes crippled Iran's conventional navy. The next 10,000 will likely place a bigger focus on the asymmetrical aspects of Iran's naval approach. But by now, you may be wondering how all of this is possible for the US. Yes, it clearly has the dominant air force long before Operation Epic Fury started. But Iran was supposed to have a layered air defense system that would stop the US in its tracks. That network failed, and the initial strikes that made up part of the 10,000 were a large part of the reason why. Air superiority has been achieved, and the numbers when it comes to Iran's air defenses reveal all. Now, as early as March 5th, the IDF was claiming that about 80% of Iran's air defenses had been taken out of commission, either through direct destruction of the systems themselves or by taking out radars through strikes and cyber attacks. And at that point, the IDF conducted around 2,500 strikes and expended around 6,000 munitions, which itself gives us an idea of just how many weapons the US may have used in its 10,000 strikes. Now, some simple math tells us that the US may have used as many as 24,000 munitions to hit the 10,000 target mark, though this assumes that it is using the same amount of munitions as Israel. Not a huge amount has changed on Iran's air defense front since, not that it really needs to, with 80% of its network already down. Iran has to resort to attempting to defend its skies with isolated systems that are too spread out and often incapable of dealing with the threat that the US poses from the sky. This early shattering of Iran's air defenses has created the air superiority that paved the way for the 10,000 targets hit that Cooper claims. Now, Cooper also points out that the air superiority has extended to the point where America now has its B-52 bomber force executing a high volume of strikes into Iran and demonstrating our unmatched dominance in the air. That statement is revealing because the B-52 is far from the most modern bomber that the US has in its arsenal. First flying in the mid-1950s, the B-52 isn't stealthy, and it isn't all that technologically advanced. What the bomber offers is a ton of storage for munitions that can be dropped in huge volumes in Iran. If Iran's air defenses were still viable, this bomber wouldn't be able to operate in the country's skies. The B-52 is too big and too easily spotted, even by the older Russian and Chinese air defense systems that make up Iran's network. The fact that it's flying at all showcases just how comprehensively Iran's air defenses have been taken out of the game. And the same could be said of the A-10s and Apache helicopters that the US has deployed in the Strait of Hormuz, both of which are able to fly repeated sorties because the threat that Iran poses to them is now limited to a smattering of isolated air defenses. And with these kinds of airframes in the mix, it's clear that the US has moved from surgical to sledgehammer in Operation Epic Fury. 10,000 targets hit and counting is being made possible because Iran's air defenses are so weak that the US can deploy non-stealth aircraft with massive payloads into the country. But there may be a problem with America's air-based approach. Earlier in the video, we told you that what comes next on Operation Epic Fury may change everything. The Guardian puts this more cynically in a March 26th article, where it claims that the US may have been under a delusion that an easy air victory was at hand, only to find that Iran still has not capitulated to the volume of force of its 10,000 strikes. In other words, the US may not be able to win through air power alone, no matter how effective that power may have been in terms of destroying Iran's military infrastructure. The US may have to follow up, and that would mean boots on the ground. Now, ideally, the US won't end up sending soldiers into Iran. Trump himself has already said that Operation Epic Fury is winding down, and there are several off-ramps that the US is trying to make available to Iran. The 15-point peace plan we mentioned earlier is one of them, as the Trump administration hopes that the damage caused by the US hitting 10,000 targets is enough to cow Iran's regime into submitting to a peace deal that limits its power and nuclear ambitions. That deal would also reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is the one major lever that Iran still has in play. But if that off-ramp doesn't work, the second off-ramp was hinted at by the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt on March 25th, when she said President Trump does not bluff and he is prepared to unleash hell. Iran should not miscalculate again. Translation: agree to the peace plan or the US is sending in the soldiers. The US is already preparing for this possibility, and at the time of this video's creation, paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division were en route to the Middle East. The US has also deployed 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, or MEUs, one of which has already arrived alongside an amphibious assault group led by the USS Tripoli. Now that means 3,500 American soldiers, including around 2,000 Marines, are already in the Persian Gulf. The arrival of the second MEU will approximately double those numbers, and there may be as many as 3,000 paratroopers. This is a ground invasion force, but it's not one large enough to tackle mainland Iran. Their likely targets will be the islands in and around the Strait of Hormuz, which the US may aim to control both to forcibly reopen the strait and to place massive pressure on Iran's economy. The Washington Post reports that the Pentagon has prepared strategies for several weeks of ground operations in Iran, which likely include the seizure of the key Iranian oil hub, Karg Island. However, Trump has yet to approve these plans. The US is clearly waiting for Iran's next move. Perhaps Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf has already hinted at what that move will be. In its March 29th live reporting of Operation Epic Fury, the BBC reported Ghalibaf as claiming that Iran is waiting for American soldiers to enter on the ground so they can rain fire upon them. Now, Iran's strategy, then, is clear. Its regime has managed to survive the US hitting 10,000 targets from the air. Now it's trying to hold to force a ground operation that increases the risk of the US losing more personnel in Operation Epic Fury. Boots on the ground seem almost inevitable unless something drastic changes very soon. Iran's regime must remember one thing. It's 10,000 strikes and counting, not 10,000 targets and done. If America's Marines and paratroopers do enter Iranian territory, they'll likely be doing it under a firestorm of missiles and bombs that will likely target everything from the remains of Iran's military infrastructure to the soldiers and armor Iran intends to deploy to counter America's ground forces. Boots going on the ground could mean big trouble for Karg Island, which has already been hit by some of the 10,000 strikes that the US has pulled off. That island is everything for Iran's economy, especially when it comes to oil exports, and the biggest US ground invasion in Iran's history may have Karg in its sights. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show to see more of our coverage of Operation Epic Fury.